My name is Pastor Kyle. I'm the community's discipleship pastor here. If you haven't met me, hello. Come find me afterwards. Introduce yourself. I'd love to meet as many people as I can. We've been here about a month. My wife and kids have transitioned up about 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago. And so we're in this transition period of moving from Northern Virginia up here, and they finished school, and so now they're up here. And it's very fitting what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about storms that God brings into our lives, looking at Jonah. And I think it was no coincidence that God kind of orchestrated it so that I would be looking at this with you guys this morning. And he has spoken to me in great ways this week as I was working through this, so I'm kind of excited about it. Last week we began our series in Jonah. Pastor Dave started us out, and it was great. I love the book of Jonah. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's good stuff. It's a crazy story. It's a true story, but it's a deep story, no pun intended. There's so much to it. It's very, 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 very cool. So we started out, Pastor Dave did verse 1 through 3. Today we're doing 4 through 6. I'm pretty sure we're going to speed up next week. We're not going to just do 3 verses at a time. But Dave will be preaching it, so you never know. Could be one verse. Could be 7 o'clock will be one verse, 8 o'clock will be the next verse. But so let's read what these 3 verses that Pastor Dave went through last week to catch up kind of where we came from. Starting in verse 1, chapter 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish, so he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. So Jonah heard from God, this is a call, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go to Nineveh. I want you to speak out against it. He knew that they were going to respond and repent. Jonah didn't like that. Jonah didn't want that. Remember, Pastor Dave said that he wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of success. He said, no, not going to do it. And he took off. And he's running. And one of the main points that Pastor Dave shared was that we were born runners. We're born with our back to God. We're born turned against him, and we're born to run. And we don't have to learn that. And when we hear from God something we don't like, or if God is just doing something that we don't like, we have this tendency to turn away from him and to go our own way. And we go to hide from him. And again, we don't have to learn this. I have a 4-year-old daughter. Her name is Carolina, but we call her Lily. Her middle name is Lillian. And so if you see a girl running around and we say Lily 6 times, and then we go, Carolina, that's why. So Lily, when she was 2.5 years old, she's quite the expressive artist. And when she was 2 years old, she snuck out of her bedroom one morning, probably during a 7 o'clock service when I was asleep. And she went into the kitchen, and if you have kids, you can feel my pain here. She found a Sharpie. She didn't find a washable Crayola. She didn't find a pencil with an eraser. She found a Sharpie. And she snuck back up into her room with this Sharpie. And I woke up. I don't think my wife was home. I think she had already left for work. And I wake up and I'm getting breakfast and doing my thing. And normally I can hear what sounds like a construction work site up in her bedroom. And noise and ruckus and her singing and all this. But it was dead silent. It was dead silent this morning. And if you're a parent, you're like, they're dead. And so I was like, I should probably go check. So I creep up the stairs and I open the door. And she's usually either on her bed or on the floor, surrounded by stuffed animals and toys. But this morning, I didn't see her in there. And I couldn't hear anything. And I look, and on her bed are a pile of toys that she had pulled out of all different places in her room, with a single Sharpie mark across them, as if she were saying, got it, check, this is mine, all the way. There was probably 50 little things on there. She has like these little fake food. She likes to play kitchen, right? So all of those were checked off and sitting on her bed. And then I looked over to the side and I noticed that there was a new art adorning the wall. on this whole entire wall, and then on this whole entire wall. And I had a sneaking suspicion it was her because it came up this high, except near the bed where it went up this high, and then back down again. And so my anger burned within me, and I said, Lily, where are you? And I didn't hear anything. I said, Lily, you need to come out. I didn't hear anything. I said, Carolina! And then I heard this faint little whimper off in the distance. So I look over to the closet. And peeking out of the closet, the door is open about this much. Peeking out of the closet is this little sad face, this little girl who is hiding from me. So I did what every good father would do at this moment. I took a picture. And there it is. Yeah, that's what I said too. Oh, that is pretty sad and ridiculously adorable. So I said, Lily, come out here. I can't reach your butt from here. No. I said, Lily, come on out here. It's okay, blah, 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 and did lots of sappy stuff. And so she came out, and here's one more picture we have, I think, of her. There she is. This is after grace was extended and reconciliation occurred. And I picked her up and hugged her and kissed her, and since then her stains of Sharpie have been washed clean. So that's an example, this is proof that we were born to run and we are born to hide, because I didn't teach her. My wife may have gotten her to the side and said, Lily, steal a Sharpie and hide in the closet, but I don't think she did. She was born to run, as we all were. So that's where we left it last week. Jonah is running. He's running and hiding. He was called to go to Nineveh. He said, forget it, I'm not doing it. He turned his back to God, and he ran away, literally the opposite direction. He went down. He paid his way on a boat that was going as far away as he could possibly go, and hid down in the bottom of that boat. So he's on his way, and he's running. So we're going to look at verse 4 through 6, and we're going to look at this storm. And there are, as we look through this passage, and we're going to look at one other one, we're going to look at this storm from three different angles. And we all have storms that come crashing into our life. You can't deny it. You may be going through one right now. And my hope is that we can find some truth in this that we can apply. So let's go ahead and read 4 through 6. Jonah chapter 1. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid. Each cried out to his God. They hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner parts of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep. The captain came to him and said, "What do you mean, you sleeper?" Some translations say, "What are you doing asleep?" which is a little better translation. He said, "Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us, and we may not perish." So the first storm, and we normally when we see storms, we think of storms that God throws on us or storms that we go through. Certainly this storm, when I first read this, I thought, man, Jonah's just getting what's coming to him. Right? He's running from God, and God in his righteous anger is just throwing this storm down on him to show him who's boss. And that's not what's happening. I hope to see as we go through this morning that there is a far greater thing that God is trying to display through these storms than his anger. So this first storm that we're going to look at, or the first angle we're going to look at this storm from, is from above. The storm above. They're in this ship, and try to picture yourself on this ship, okay? Maybe you're the captain, maybe you're one of the crew members, and you're just hanging out in Joppa, doing your job. You work on a cargo ship, and this kind of frantic guy comes running up, and he says, "Hey, I got to get out of here. I hear you're going to Tarshish. I want to ride. I got some money. I'm running from God. It's odd that Jonah said that, but he did. We see it later on in Jonah that he had told them that he's running from God. Now, just as a little tip, okay? If anybody ever comes up to you and says, hey, I need a ride, I'm running from God, say no. Say no, get out of my car, get off of my boat, stay out of my plane. Just say no. But these guys, they said, all right. So the captain lets them on the ship, and they pay his fare, whatever it would be, and he goes down into the bottom of the boat, and they take off. It's a cargo ship. They're taking off for it's a pretty long trip. I don't know how many days it would take, but it was not a one-day trip. And they're going out across the Mediterranean. And these guys, remember, they're probably pretty seasoned sailors. This was a long trip, so it wouldn't be, they're not all rookies. These guys know the sea, certainly the captain. And I don't know anything about sailing. There's not a lot of places to sail where I grew up. I've been on a boat a few times, and it seems very difficult to do all the boat things that boat people do with the sails, and they have words I don't know, and they have a starboard, and they have something called a poop deck. Did you know that? That's crazy. All these different things that it's just a whole different language. But these guys know what they're doing, and they're up on the boat, and experienced sailors can read the ocean, and they can read the sky. They're looking for a storm. They know it's coming. They know it's coming. They can see the change in the ripples. You can feel the temperature drop. There's a lot of things that they can. I can't do that. I just get on my iPhone and look, oh, there's a storm coming. They probably didn't have iPhones. But this particular storm was different. This one came out of nowhere. There weren't all these signs that would say, hey, look out, go back. Batten down the hatches, matey, all these ship terms, right? It came up out of nowhere. So imagine yourself on this boat, and you're sailing along, everything seems fine, and then all of a sudden, you hear this rumble of thunder. The temperature drops 10 or 15 degrees, and the boat starts going up and down a little more than you're used to. And then you notice that the sky is pitch black. And you got caught in this, and you didn't know it was coming. This is where these guys are. And the rain starts coming down, and it is dumping. It says God hurled a wind down onto the sea. That's a lot different than, a gentle breeze started to blow, and they could smell fresh air, and they knew that something was coming. There was, boom! He hurled this wind down. And I have a thought that if God hurls something, it's a big deal, and it's scary, and it's shocking, and that's what he does. He hurls this wind, and the rain is coming, and the thunder and the lightning is cracking, and they're up on the deck of this boat, and it has caught them unaware. And then the water starts crashing over, and they're taking on water, and it says, this was kind of cool. It says the ship threatened to break up. That phrase in the original Hebrew, it's a phrase actually means the ship itself thought it was breaking, which is a little poetic language that even the ship thought it was done for. The ship was afraid. That's how big of a storm that this is. And this is what these guys are going through. So there's three things that they do. And I don't blame them on the first one. If you notice, the first thing they did, they were terrified. They were scared. They reacted in fear. It said they were absolutely terrified, which again, I don't blame them. My wife was on a little, kind of like a dinghy boat sort of thing up in Maine like a summer ago, and she was pregnant with Hannah, very much pregnant. I didn't know about this, by the way, until last week. She was in this little dinghy out on this giant pond. I know it's like pond, that's not very intimidating, but it was a big pond. And you couldn't really see the other end very well. And they were out on this little dinghy, and this storm kind of came out of nowhere, and it was rocking back and forth. And she said they were getting pretty scared, and it was getting nuts. And the guy who owned the boat, like he'd been out on it a whole bunch of times, and she showed me a picture last week. I should have put it in here of Carolina, marker girl, actually sleeping on this boat like in this little thing in a life preserver. And then Christopher, our 6-year-old, is like next to her, freaking out like that. And when they get to the side, when they get to the shore, Sarah's friend, she asked her husband, she said, was that as bad as we thought it was? And he said, oh yeah, we should have gone back a long time before that. And this crazy storm kind of came up. I'm not sure why I told you that story, but I thought it was cool. So the second thing they did after they were terrified, they called out to their own gods. They sought comfort and help from false gods. And you think, well, I don't do that. I would never do that. It's true, you probably haven't like run off and made a golden calf and then put it up on the mantle and worshiped it. You probably have not done that. I doubt you had a bad day and was like, forget it, I'm going to a Hindu temple and I'm just going to go worship some. You probably didn't do that. But don't sell yourself short. We are capable of great sin. How often do we, when storms come crashing in and God's doing things we don't like, how often do we take comfort in things other than Him? Man, too often. Too often. Maybe it's just, you're just going to sit in front of the TV all day. And every night you come home from work and you're just going to sit there and watch TV because you don't want to think about anything else. This is going to be your little idol that you're going to sit there. Maybe it's your cell phone. Like every time there's a quiet moment, I better just pull out my phone so that I don't have to think about anything else. Maybe I'll check Facebook 16 times. Right? We kind of put these things up as these idols. And then it could be a number of things. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be an affair, it could be big picture things. But these little things are just as true that we run to those. So that's the second thing they do. They seek to find comfort in false gods. And then the third thing they do is they scramble to do all they can on their own to fix the situation, right? Because their false gods didn't do it. These gods they cried out to, they had no power. They weren't even real. They couldn't do it. So the third thing they do is they scramble to get it all done on their own. And they're on a ship, they're on a cargo ship. So there's all these boxes and stuff that they're taking across, and it's not their stuff, right? So they're responsible for it financially. I doubt they have insurance. And when this storm breaks out, and everything is chaotic and crazy, and they have nowhere else to turn, they've gotten down to the part where they're no longer really concerned about their well-being, their livelihood, their job, money, all that stuff. It's been stripped all the way down to survival. All they're interested in is surviving. So they're doing all they can on their own power to survive, and they start throwing all this stuff off the ship. And it doesn't work. So then the captain remembers, there's that weird dude that came on when we were leaving port who's sleeping down underneath. I'm going to go see what he's doing. And he goes down there and we see that he says, what are you doing asleep? Get up. Our gods aren't answering, maybe yours will. And so he comes up, and the rest of that story we're gonna look at the weeks to come. The second storm, the second angle I want to look at this storm from is that of the storm within. The storm within the boat, the storm within Jonah. There's a greater storm that's raging within Jonah, a storm that has distracted him from the storm above. Right? It said that he went down and went to sleep. We don't know how long he'd been asleep. We don't know if he saw the storm coming in and he's like, I'm out of here. We don't know if he just had been out for hours and hours before this ever came. We don't know. But we know that he's asleep. And he is completely consumed with a storm that's raging within him, that this storm above is background noise. And that storm that's raging within him started long before he got on that boat. And Pastor Dave talked last week about how it's a slow fade that we get to the point where Jonah is, and he's literally running and going the other direction away from God. And it is. He heard God's call. He straight up rejected it. He's running and hiding. And because of that, his heart is become calloused. Something Pastor Dave talked about last week near the end of the sermon I thought was really, really good. So I am stealing it, and I'm going to say it again. If we can edit this on the recording and make it look like it was me. He said 4 things that we can look at that are symptoms of us running from God. And the first one is we ignore God's word. We put it on the shelf. It doesn't hold the same power. We don't pay as much attention to it. We just ignore it. We don't want to hear it. And this is clearly what Jonah's doing. God spoke very clearly to him as a prophet, do this. And Jonah said no, and he ignored it. And he didn't just say, oh, maybe that didn't happen. I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear it. But he proactively got up and went against it. Second, we harbor past sin. Pastor Dave talked about that last week. He's harboring the sin of the Ninevites against his people, and all. It's just this terrible, terrible place. It's like New York City, Washington, D.C., and Las Vegas all wrapped up into one. It's the capital. It's the biggest. It's Sin City. It's a mess. And he's looking at that and saying, well, no, I don't want them to be forgiven. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go up there. He's harboring that past sin. Third, we begin to isolate ourselves from God and from other believers. And you can't get more isolated than leaving your own town, finding a port, paying off some people you don't know who are all worshiping pagan gods and hiding in the bottom of the boat as you take off. It doesn't get much more isolated than that. And we do that. If you find yourself like, hey, I don't really feel like going to church this week, It's like, I'm just not into it anymore. If that starts to be a pattern, that's a red flag. If the people that you used to hang out with, people who love God and are pointing you towards God and are building you up, if your friendships with them are starting to fade, that is a red flag. That is a red flag. And then the last one is we think distance from God will bring real freedom, which is exactly what he's doing. When we do these 4 things on a consistent basis, it builds a callus around our heart. And that's what happened to Jonah. It's built a callus up around his heart. Now, calluses in the summertime when you're running around in bare feet are a good thing. They're gross, but they're a good thing. I like to be barefoot in the summertime. I'm not barefoot now because that would be inappropriate, but I want to be. So the first week of the summer, when the weather's nice, my shoes are off. And I'm just running around without any shoes, it's all good. If I run across the parking lot in the gravel over here, it hurts. It hurts because I have no calluses on my feet. If I step on even like a tiny little piece of gravel, it hurts. When I was a kid, we had a pool in the backyard, and there was all gravel. We'd run around that. In the beginning of the summer, we'd be like walking like this, By the end of the summer, we're just flying right across it. It's nothing because over time, these calluses build up. Now, here's the thing with calluses. It's not the sharp rocks or the glass or the rough stone that builds up the calluses. Because when you don't have a callus and you run across that, what happens? You get cut, and it bleeds, and it hurts, and it's gross because your wife's got to pick it out with the tweezers. It's not good. Jeremy's like, yeah, Kelly, pick these out. But what it is, it's the sand. It's the dirt that we walk on that doesn't hurt. Over time, builds up those calluses. When you walk around on grass barefooted for a long time, and then you're walking through the sand, and you're walking on stuff that doesn't hurt over time, that's what builds up the calluses. It's the small stuff, so that when that callus is built up, and you step on the glass or the rock, it doesn't hurt. You don't feel it. And that's the danger. And when our heart is calloused, it's the same thing. Pastor Dave said last week, you don't wake up at 30 and say, I want to have an affair, right? That happened because at 20, your eyes wandered. You don't wake up one day and say, I'm just going to go be a drunk. It happened because earlier you started making small compromises, and the little things started to callous over your heart to where later on down the road, the big things couldn't penetrate. Does that make sense? That's what's happened to Jonah. This storm within that has raged has caused this to happen to him. And that storm that's in him, it's almost come to it's almost like a hurricane where the storm raged through, and he fought God, and he fought God, and he ran, and now he's on this boat, and he's asleep. He probably thinks he's outrun him, but he's in the eye of the hurricane. He's in the calm before the next wave hits, and that next wave is coming, and that next wave is a doozy. So that's the storm within. That's the storm that God has, I would say Jonah brought it on himself, but God is working in it. God is working in his heart on purpose, and we're going to see in a little bit it's a good thing. The next storm that I want to look at, we're going to fast forward. When you read this story in Jonah about, they're out in the storm and it's crazy coming down and Jonah's asleep. It's a familiar story. Fast forward 800 years, go to the book of Mark. Chapter 4. This is no coincidence. This is no coincidence at all. The similarities we're about to see here. We're in Mark chapter 4, and I'm going to start reading in verse 35. On that day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filled. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And when they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke, he rebuked the storm and the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obeys?" It's familiar. It's like a little deja vu all over again. And this story in Jonah is definitely a foreshadowing and a precursor to this other storm. And they all kind of weave together. Here's the thing that's going on there, right? So all his disciples, these are guys that walk with him. These are guys that know him. These are guys that get a lot of things wrong and they make a lot of mistakes. But these are people who trust him. They've left everything to follow him, right? They're going with him. And they're also experienced fishermen. They're experienced on boats. And they're going across the water. And out of nowhere, this raging storm comes up. When storms come into our life, we rarely see them coming. We rarely see them coming. They just sneak up and then bam, we're drowning. And this is what happens here. They're going across the water, and this raging storm comes, and Jesus is asleep in the boat. And these waves come, and the guys all start to panic. They start to panic. They're freaking out. They run down, and they wake Jesus up. And they say, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Translate that into like kind of modern English. They ran down, they grabbed Jesus, and they said, "We're all going to die. Do something. Do you even care?" Right? This is what they do. They run down, they say, "Do you even care that we're all going to die?" When storms come raging into our lives, and they happen over and over again, have you ever found yourself to say, "God, do you even care? I thought you were good. I thought you cared about me. I thought you loved me. Why am I having difficulty paying the mortgage? Why are my kids struggling in school? Why am I not getting along with my boss or my wife or my kids? Or why are these storms coming in? Why does the car keep breaking down? Why does the car break down the same day as the washer explodes? Or why does the air conditioner break? And then when we go to meet the air conditioner guy, we find out there's a leak shooting out in the garage and half the garage is flooded. I mean, just hypothetically. Why do these things keep happening to me? God, do you even care? This is the same response that we give. This is the response that the disciples gave to Jesus. Run in. Do you not even care that we're all going to die? So Jesus gets up. I always wondered what it would look like, what it looked like when he woke up, He'd like, wake up. Is he like, what are you doing, guys? I'm trying to sleep, Like, man, what is going on? Or is he like, just in time? I don't know. But I think it was probably more like that, like, yep, all right, right on cue. And he goes up to the top of the boat. And it's rocking. I mean, he's got to be a killer surfer because the boat is going crazy and he's just standing there. He goes, "Peace, be still." And the storm, like a switch, just turns off. And the disciples look at him, and naturally, they are terrified. They're no longer terrified of the power in the storm. They're terrified by the power of the one who controls the storm. And that is okay. And they're terrified by this, and they say, how, what, who, huh? And Jesus says, he says two things here. He shows us two things. And this is pretty cool. First thing he does is he displays his complete power and sovereignty over the storm. And also in every storm that we face. He displays that in that one act of peace be still. He shows that he's the one in charge. He's the one in control. And then second, he shows them, he doesn't just tell them, but he shows them there is no need to be afraid because he controls the storm. That's pretty remarkable. And this can be true, and this should be true in our lives, the storms that we face. And it's easy, you know, I kind of give the disciples a hard time, where I'm like, man, they know Jesus is down there. This ship's not going to sink because, you know, it's Jesus. But I promise you, I would be panicking the same way. I'd be the first one down there. And I'd be like, Jesus, what are you doing? You got to save the day. I was on an airplane flying out of Utah. I hate to fly now. Who here likes to fly? You guys like to fly? A few people like to fly. I hate to fly. I used to like it. I used to be good with it. But I was flying out of Utah a few years back, and I was with a group of teenagers, like 20, 25 of them. And if you're flying in and out of Salt Lake City, we're at this conference. There's kind of almost like a horseshoe of a mountain range that they decided to build the airport right in the middle of. And so so the plane is like settled in there, or the runway is settled in there, and we take off. And I'm good with flying, you know, like it's all good. And we're taking off, and there's all these kids sitting around. We got the whole back of the plane. They stuck us all back there because we're loud and crazy, and we're going along. And, you know, a little turbulence is normal. I'm used to that, just like shaking a little bit. It's all good. And then all of a sudden, this like crazy turbulence hits, and it's, you know, it's all rocking, and the lights flicker. And everybody grabs a hold of their seat rest, you know, or the little armrest, and I grab it. I'm like, this is not good. And then it gets louder and louder, and I'm like, all right, Kyle, you got to keep it together because all these teenagers are looking at you, and if you act like a scared little girl, they're going to never let you live it up. So, you know, man up. And it gets worse and worse, and it's getting louder, and normally turbulence just kind of does this. This was like doing that, and when you're in the back of the plane, it's even worse. And it's shaking, and the lights go off, and the plane drops at least 50 feet. Just whew. Now 50 feet, I don't know how many thousand feet we're up. We were nowhere near the ground, but in that moment, we all thought that death was imminent. People were screaming. One lady gets up and runs to the back with her arms flailing behind her like she's escaping the turbulence. And she's running right towards us, and we're holding on to things and trying not to puke, and all the kids are like, wee, this is great. And I'm like, this is awesome. And the lady runs back, and the stewardesses are panicking, and their eyes are all big and bulging out, and one of them grabs this lady and puts her down in the seat, and the captain comes on, and ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some slight turbulence. Please make sure that you're, and then he's like, "Whoa!" And then he goes back to make sure your seatbelts are on, you know. And we're like, yeah, thanks, buddy. And I don't know, a few minutes go by. It felt like about an hour and a half, but it was probably just a few minutes, and everything is okay. We're back up. We're smooth sailing, you know. And this lady that had run back frantically, she's now got oxygen on, and you know, she's sitting there hyperventilating, and all the kids that I was with, you know, and they were sitting around her talking to her, and they're laughing and like, oh, I hope it happens again. And I said, I'm taking a nap. But I actually was praying. And when I closed my eyes to pray, this story popped into my mind. Where I'm ashamed to say that my first instinct wasn't, God, you've got this. I can enjoy the ride. But it wasn't. I'm ashamed to say my first instinct was, we're all going to die. Give me some oxygen and a parachute. But when I closed my eyes, this story came to mind, and God reminded me, look, I'm in control of this plane. I'm the one holding it up in my hands. You're going to be fine. And so when you look at the disciples and you say, well, man, and I say, what a bunch of punks, why are they panicking? I would have done the same thing. And I still don't like to fly. But maybe I'll get over it. All right, so with that storm, God displays his complete sovereignty over that storm and all storms, and he shows the disciples that there's no need to be afraid. So how do these storms all tie together? What's the whole point of this? All these sound terrible. Oh, we got a storm up above, and the ship is breaking, and everybody's scared, and they're crying out to their false gods, and they're throwing stuff overboard, and it looks terrible, and there's no hope. And who wants to be on that ship? I don't want to be on that ship. And then there's the storm within where Jonah, he's wrestling with God, and he's kind of given up the fight, and he said, forget it, I'm out of here, and he's just taken off, and the storm is still brewing within him. How is that possibly a good thing? And then we've got the third storm where Jesus is on the boat, and he calms it, and everybody was scared, and I don't want to be on a boat like that. I want to learn the lessons, but I don't want to have to go through the storm, Here's what ties them all together. The storm that we see in Jonah, at first glance, looks like God just throwing his punishment and anger out on him to show him who's boss. But in reality, that storm, along with the other storm and every storm that hits our life, is an act of grace. The storm that God throws down here and the storms that God allows or brings into our lives, they are all acts of grace. And here's how we know that. The storm above, for the sailors, they didn't know God. They were worshiping false gods. They were doing their own thing. They weren't specifically running away from God, but they were against him. They didn't know him. In God's grace, he throws a storm at them that causes them to what? I'm going to cheat and look ahead in Jonah here. After it's all said and done, it says that they feared God because of this, and they made vows to him. I don't know what their relationship with him looked like moving forward, but God gave them a chance. God reached in and said, hey, I'm real, and look what I can do. And out of their fear, when they watched him calm the storm, they had a very similar response that the disciples would have 800 years later, and they said, who is this guy? This is not normal. This God did something. Our gods were silent. So that storm that God brought in on those sailors was an act of grace that showed them a little bit of who he was and drew them towards him. The second storm, the storm within Jonah that was raging. Now, it was Jonah that brought it on himself, but it was God's grace that allowed it to continue, and he nurtured that. And you say, well, he made the storm worse? Yeah, because he's a gracious God, he chased him. And that's what made that storm worse and worse and worse. If you're running from God, Lord willing, a storm will come to you too. What does this storm do for Jonah? It corrected his course. It corrected his course, literally and spiritually. He's on a boat going this way, and I don't want to ruin the story for you, but not long after this, he gets thrown overboard, and a small, smelly submarine swallows him up and takes him the opposite direction. God changes his course, and everything in him changed at that point. He still wrestled with God, but God used that storm that he brought in to change his course. And then the third one, we already looked at, the storm that he brought on the disciples, the people who walked with him, people that knew him, the people that trusted him. They're still figuring it out, just like us, right? But these were the good guys. They were doing what they were supposed to do. It seemed everything was cool, but a storm came down and crushed on them for two reasons. By God's grace, to show his sovereignty and power over that storm and all other storms, and to show us that there's no need to be afraid of the storm. So here's the thing. If you're not a Christian and you're here, I am so glad you're here. Keep coming back. If you're not a Christian and you're here, I'm telling you, there will be storms in your life. Some big, some small. Some will be raging storms you think you're not going to make it out of alive. Some are going to be little sprinkles that you kind of brush off and pretend aren't there. There's going to be storms in your life, and they are brought from God through his grace. They're not simply this display of power to say, look how powerful and great I am. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. It's an act of grace to draw you to himself. And what did he do on the boat when they were up there during that storm? He stripped them of themselves. He stripped them of everything that they were dealing with, the outside things, and oh, well, I got to worry about work, I got to worry about that. And all of that didn't matter anymore because it was all about survival. He stripped them down to the bare essentials, and it's just about surviving. And the storms do that. And it gets us to the point where we have no choice but to stare God right in the face. And that storm is an act of grace. If you're here and you are a Christian and maybe you've been running, maybe God said he wants you to do something, he's called you to do something, but you don't like it, and so you're running, which it happens all the time. I've got a very good friend who he came to know the Lord a few years back, and he is a great guy, loved the Lord, loved people. People are just attracted to him, to hang out and to talk to him, and he's just that kind of personality. And he felt God called him to be a pastor. So he started to pursue that and was getting ready to go to school. And some storms came into his life that were not really his doing. At least it didn't seem like it at first. These storms would come. And he lost his footing. And it came out of nowhere for me, and it came out of nowhere for him. And his ship started to sink. And this guy got angry, and he started running from God. And he's been running for a couple years now. And I texted him this week, and I said, hey, buddy, I'm preaching on Sunday, and I've been thinking about you all week. I hope that he didn't respond to it because he's running from God. He's isolated himself. The word no longer matters to him. He's off the map. He's off the map. And my wife said something to me a few years back. She had a friend who was kind of going through the same thing. She said, I just pray. She says, pray that God will do whatever it takes, bring whatever storm into his life to turn him around and bring him back. And this guy, I really believe he was a believer, but he decided to run from God. Pulled a Jonah and took off. And that storm, if you're here and you're a believer, and any of those symptoms that we talked about earlier, if any of them ring true, man, turn around. Turn back. The storm is only going to rage more and more and more. And if you feel like you're in the calm, the back of the hurricane is coming. And if you're here and you are a believer, and you're walking with the Lord, you're doing the best you can, you're seeking after his will, you're stumbling and falling, and you're getting back up, and you're helping everyone else who falls, and you're helping them get up, and you love the Lord. You love his word. You're plugged in. You're trying to serve him. Storms are going to come. I promise, they're going to come. When you sign up to be a Christian, hey, give me this Christianity thing, you're not signing up that everything's going to be easy. In fact, it's the opposite. Things are going to often be harder. But we will know and we can trust the one who controls the storm. So if you're a believer and you're here, know that the storms are coming. And know that in those storms, he will display his sovereignty and his ultimate power over those storms. And he brings them in oftentimes to show us that. When I was a little kid, my mom used to love watching storms. We didn't grow up in the woods, but it was kind of like woodsy. For Northern Virginia, it was pretty woodsy. And we had like a bunch of trees in the front, like these little islands of trees, and then a yard. And the back of the house was all woods. There was like 2 acres of woods back there, and the neighbors were a little bit off. There was trees between. And it was Virginia, so the ground was mostly clay. There's a lot of moss. And when the storms would come, I was like maybe 6 years old, 5 years old. I was really like 18, but we're going to pretend I was 6. I would get really scared of these storms, and I would want to hide. But my mom, she's like, "Hey, we're going out, and we're going to watch this storm." She'd grab my hand, and she'd go out, and we'd sit on the front porch, and there was a covering that came over, and we'd sit there, and we'd watch as the storm came rolling in, and the temperature would drop, and the wind would get louder, and the trees would start to sway, and then all of a sudden you'd hear the sprinkles of the rain hitting the leaves. It would get louder and louder and louder, and the thunder would crack. And since the ground was clay, the water wouldn't get absorbed very quickly, so it would pool up all over the yard. And so you could see the water splashing in all these puddles almost immediately, and this storm would just come raging in. And as it would get worse and worse, I would get more and more anxious, and I'd want to go inside. And I'd look at my mom, and the worse the storm got, the bigger the grin on her face. And as the thunder cracked, she would almost get giddy because she loved to watch the power of this storm. And as the thunder cracked and I would get more afraid, I would scoot a little bit closer to her, to comfort her. I would scoot it a little bit closer. She'd put her arm around me, and I would watch. And here's the thing. She knew that on the other side of that storm was a greater peace. She knew that on the other side of that storm, things were going to be different. And they were. As soon as that storm dissipated and the sun came out, you could hear birds chirping. The birds would start to come out. You would even see all the bugs would kind of crawl out from under the porch and start doing stuff, and life would come back to the front yard. Because before the storm, everybody hunkered down, right? And after that storm, it brought a newness. It brought a reset, a restart. And she knew that was coming. And she just sat there in awe and watched the storm do its thing. And as I walk with the Lord, the more and more I watch storms come in and out of other people's lives and into my own life, I've realized that God often brings these storms in so that he can say, "Hey, look what I can do." And when that storm is raging and you think, "Man, this is the end of it. There's no way to survive this," he comes through in what feels like unbelievable ways. So if you're going through a storm, just scoot over to him as the thunder cracks and enjoy the show, because he's already told us he's in charge of the storm and there's no need to fear it because it's his storm. This is a message that is powerful to me because I don't like to admit it, but I feel like we're in a storm. My wife and I are in a bit of a storm. We're moving from Virginia, and we're in transition, and we're living in someone's basement up here, which is great. It's great, but we do have 3 kids, and then down in Virginia, our air conditioner broke, and then when we went to get it fixed, the garage was half flooded. And yeah, so we just went swimming. It wasn't that bad. It was hot inside, so we went to the pool in the basement. But it just seems like wave after wave, is kind of coming. And a friend of mine down in Virginia said, "Well, does this mean that you made a horrible mistake and that God doesn't want you to?" I'm like, "Are you stupid? No, when did God say, 'Hey, it's all going to be easy. Do what I say and it's all going to be easy. It's going to be smooth sailing'?" No, he didn't say that. He didn't say it's going to be smooth sailing. He just said, "I'm in control of the storm." And as my wife and I have been talking about it and just, wow, God's really, going to show us something. She says, just hold on tight. God's in control of the storm. And the bigger the storm, the bigger the payoff on the other side. I think it's true. So anyway, those are the 3 storms, and I want to encourage you, if you don't know Christ and you're here this morning, you have an opportunity to do that. You always have an opportunity to do that here. Come talk to me or Pastor Dave or anyone who you know and trust. That say, "Hey, that's me. I don't know the Lord, and I know that it sounds like he's the only one that can get me through this. He's the one in control of the storm." If you're a believer and you're running, time's up. Stop running. To be honest with yourself, stop running. The road you're going down is a dead end and the bridge is out. So if you need to get things right, today's a good day to do it. Turn around, come back in and draw near to him. And if you're walking with the Lord and everything seems to be good, hold on tight because the storm is coming. Let's pray.